Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me as always is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Hello.
It's Season 3, Episode 22. We are getting through the rest of the NFL offseason. Training camp is just a couple weeks away from kicking off. But the big news that's been talked about throughout Pittsburgh and the NFL world lately has been the franchise tag and players who have been tagged having deadlines to sign a long-term extension for the second year in a row. The deadline has come and gone for LeVeon Bell. Any extension that was on the table has been denied by Bell. The last offer the Steelers apparently offered up Bell was a 5-year, $70 million deal with approximately $30 to $35 million in guaranteed money. So we're talking an average annual value of $14 million. The Steelers offer last year, which his agent and mother advised him to take, which he turned down, was $13.1 million. So a year later, the Steelers offer just under $1 million more per season, and Bell still turns it down. He did state that he believed he was worth at least what the franchise tag was, which is $14.5 million. So now that the deadline has come and passed once again for the second year in a row, it looks as though Lev Bell is not going to be a Steeler in 2019, so this could be his last season. What do you think about all of this?
I think my favorite thing from this is that Bell's agent, after his deal didn't get done, claimed that they tried paying the position, not the player. That can't be farther from the truth, really. If they're trying to pay the position, their offer would have been $11 million a year, over $2 million higher than the next highest paid running back, and that would have been great. That would have been paying the position more than a pretty hefty price over the next highest paid. But they offered $14 million, over $5 million more annually than the next highest paid, depending on how you look at it. Jerick McKinnon is making $10.5 million this year, but his average annual value is only $7.5. So I mean, if you want to say it's only $3.5 million more, you can. But I don't really look at it that way. But it's just this player, Mr. Bell, has an injury history and is one suspension away from being suspended for a while by the NFL. It depends, because he got the 4-game suspension that got lowered to 3 for the missing the drug test, and then he has the intoxication while driving with blunt from the other year. So, I mean, if he gets suspended again for a drug-related thing, it's probably going to be for a while. I don't know if it goes to 6 to 8 to a year. I tried looking it up. It really didn't come up, what I was hoping for. But still, he's going to be gone for some time, and he's going to lose the appeal more than likely because he's a repeat offender. But I think the Steelers did the right thing here. I think it was solid. They at least tried upping their offer, and I honestly thought they should have just upped it to 13.5 and called it a day. But they came pretty close. They got pretty dang close to that $14.5 million that Bell wanted, but they were right to not give it to him over the 5-year span. I know the extra $2.5 million doesn't sound like much, but I think it was good that they stood their ground and only offered the $14 million, because this is going to push Bell to probably have his best season. As he isn't going to just be playing to win; he's going to be playing to show off to other teams that he's worth $14.5 million a year. And I completely think no matter how it works out, it works in the Steelers' favor. Maybe he has the greatest season of his career. Great. If he could be that great, the Steelers have a great chance to make the Super Bowl this year. To be at his best, he would have to average 5 yards a carry, get 1,400 yards on the ground, get 10 rushing touchdowns, then have almost 900 yards receiving. That would beat out all his career best from all his previous seasons. If you look at any season, all of those will beat it, where he had the best stat there. If he has an average season as a running back and performs great as a receiver and pass blocker like he did last year, it should still work in the Steelers' favor. So I want to see him test the market. There's like a 50-50 chance that no team actually is willing to give out that much money for a running back that's getting older. His yards per carry went down nearly a whole yard in one season, and is one suspension away from being out a while. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when he tests the market. I right now have a 50-50 chance that a team offers him as much as he wants. But in the chance he does leave, the Steelers now have $14.5 million in cap space per year. They can pay a top-end cornerback or linebacker if they want with that kind of money and really improve the defense. And I did do a little bit of research into it. The cornerback market in 2019 isn't that great, but there will be C.J. Mosley on the market for linebackers. There will be Quan Alexander on the market. There will be Jadeveon Clowney on the market in 2019, and barring he gets franchise tagged or something, barring any of these guys get franchise tagged. There's a lot of good linebackers, and linebackers aren't really that expensive. A good inside linebacker is usually only making like maybe one of the top end ones is making $10 million a year. So, like the Steelers will still have room to work with because also Vince Williams is up that contract is up that year. Ryan Shazier's contract is up that year. Anthony Chicolo's contract is up that year, assuming he's still with the team at the time. And it's just they're going to have to pay people to pay too. But they're with $14.5 million, you could bring in a top end guy to fill a hole on defense, while still maybe paying to keep some of the guys that you need. $14.5 million is a lot to have for the salary cap. But I don't see it as the biggest loss, to be honest, losing Bell. It's like that, like just it's more of like switching where you're filling a hole. Maybe now you have a hole running back, but also we don't know how James Conner is. Maybe James Conner is really going to step up as a premier running back. You don't know. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. But that money opens up the choice to take money and throw it at someone who's proven to be good in the NFL already. But then if Bell completely falls off this next season, he loses, and the Steelers can just use the cap space again to spend on a linebacker, a cornerback. Maybe they want a top-end guard to replace Ramon Foster, even though they drafted Chuck Wuma. I don't know. But it's just that money is valuable. That's like basic. That's like the stupidest thing I could say. It's just that money can be used elsewhere. But altogether, I'm happy with how this turned out. I'm glad that Bell didn't take that $14 million a year because I think the Steelers were overpaying him for that. I think that the highest they should have won is 13.5, and I think it's going to work out great in the future. I think that the Steelers really have no losing here unless Bell has like an amazing MVP season right now, which I don't foresee happening quite. I think he can have a good season, but not an MVP one. What do you think about this whole ordeal?
Well, I think we are honestly not really in any different position now than we were yesterday or the day before that or any day going back to last year. I think when we saw that Bell turned down that deal last year, I think we both kind of figured that this was going to be happening again next year and that the chances of him signing an extension were incredibly unlikely. I think it's kind of crazy the Steelers decided to up their offer as much as they did, almost a full $1 million per season, when you consider that he's a year older and 400-plus touches deeper into his career. It just shows that Bell was serious about what he was thinking regarding his $14.5 million price tag at the minimum. I know this deal would have been front-loaded too, because at 5 years, that's a long time for a running back that's going to be 27 going into 2019. That's a long time for a guy that most running backs' careers end right around this time. So you'd be looking at possibly borrowed time and having a lot of money tied into his contract that late in the deal is something that's not really ideal. It's been a tough process for the Steelers, but there are really three ways this could have played out, and they've played it perfectly. They could have either given him the extension, which I think would have been a mistake. We just talked about how running backs tend to fall off, and he might be slowing down already. He led the league in carries this past year with 321, so it's possible he could be slowing down really quickly and wouldn't be worth the contract. That would also take away from signing players in other areas. Two, the Steelers could have just outright said you're a free agent now, but they're also in win now mode, so do you really just want to let a guy like that walk when this is your best chance to win a championship? You need that guy on your team as long as possible. So I think the Steelers have done this perfectly, and playing it year by year, it's been expensive, but it's been worth it, and it's also been a headache, but I just really don't see there being another alternative that the Steelers could have done, and that you could have said, this is probably a good way to go about it. I just think this is the best way the Steelers could have done it. And as far as next year goes, we can talk a little bit more about that later, but I think we all knew this was coming. Did you really think the Steelers were going to get a deal done with this dude?
I had no hope. I didn't think that it was happening in the slightest, especially at the last year. I am surprised that they came up so much. And when Bell said that they really were closer than they were last year, I honestly didn't believe that, but they really were. But no, I did not think that was going to happen.
I agree. I didn't see it happening. So, all right. Well, with 2018 likely being his last season in Pittsburgh, we can just roll out, I guess, kind of our stats predictions. And I extrapolated his career averages into basically my projections over a 16-game season because I really don't know how Bell is going to be, if he's going to be hurt or whatnot. So I threw it all down. I gave him 1,376 rushing yards this year as far as my projections go. That's a career average of 4.3 yards per carry. So I think he's going to be based on 20 carries a game. So I think if you're averaging that out over 16 games, that's about roughly what he's going to get on a 4.3 yards per clip. I gave him 580 receiving yards on 75 receptions. I think he's still going to catch a lot of passes, but I originally had 600, almost 700 yards. But with his yards per catch dwindling down the last few years, I also saw an interesting stat, Austin. I wasn't sure if you saw this, but Bell caught more passes or had more passes thrown to him at or behind the line of scrimmage than any player in the league last year. Did you know that?
I did. I actually did see that on Twitter.
So with that being the case, I expect him to have a lower yards per catch and therefore a lower amount of total receiving yards. So I gave him 580 total receiving yards. I already mentioned his yards per carry was at 4.3. And Bell's never been a big touchdown guy, especially on the ground. He set a career high with 9 rushing touchdowns this year, but typically he's been around 7 or 8. So I think he'll pick up 7 this year. And Austin was kind enough to point out that he's been a much better player on the road statistically with his splits than he has been at home. So I decided to give him the 4-3 edge on the road, especially considering that the Steelers' tougher opponents are mostly at home this year. I also gave Bell 2 receiving touchdowns since that's what he's had most often. He's had 2 the last 2 seasons. I think when you consider how many touches he gets a year, I think 3 fumbles is not ridiculous for him. He doesn't fumble often, and I think he did fumble 3 times last year. Yeah, 3 times last year, and 4 times a year before that. But you look before that, he only had 1 fumble, and he doesn't fumble a lot, but you think about how many times he's touching the ball, it's going to happen every now and then. And then last but not least, you put in 20-yard rushing plays. I decided to go 4. I think he'll be able to pick up 1 more than he had last year, but he's clearly not at the same level he was at earlier on in his career. He's not as explosive, I don't think. So I think that's his stat line based on my projections, which are all pretty much stat-based, based on his career averages, with the exception of receiving yards. I extrapolated that from decreasing yards per reception. So where did you get your stats, and I guess how do they stack up compared to my projections?
In terms of his rushing yardage, I think he's going to rack up 1,303. I feel like that's a decent amount for him to get. I feel like he's going to be used more as a runner this year and less as a pass catcher. So I think the 1,303 yards is pretty solid for him. And then for receiving, like I said, it's going to go down. Receiving, I think he's only going to have 596 compared to what he normally gets, which is just a little over 600. I think he's only getting 68 receptions. And the simple answer is now, Juju Smith-Schuster is going into his 2nd year. He's going to get better. Antonio Brown is always going to eat up most of the snaps. But now they have James Washington. I'm putting money down that James Washington is going to outperform Martavis, at least Martavis of last year, in his rookie season. So the catches have to be taken away somewhere. And I think James Washington is going to eat into them, and I think he only gets 68 catches this year. As for his yards per carry, I think he actually does bounce back a little bit. This past season wasn't one of his best. It wasn't. He only averaged 4.0, and that's it. I think he's going to have 4.4. I think he's going to do decently, a little bit better in between, and that's actually a pretty solid yards per carry. And as for touchdowns, I'm going to give him a 4-4 even split, giving him 8 touchdowns total, 4 at home, 4 away. I think he improved that last year. I feel like that was just a weird thing, just a weird statistic that people were pointing out. I think it's just going to go back to just randomly splitting. As for receiving touchdowns, 2 seems like a good number. The most he's ever had is 3, which surprised me. I felt like he had more. I don't know. In my head, he had more than that. But regardless, 2 seemed decent. Fumbles, I kept that at 4. He's just, and as his career progressed, he's basically gotten worse at fumbling. I think he had 4 in 2016 and then 3 in 2017, so it wasn't always getting worse. But I'm going to go back to 4 again because I feel like as time's gone on, he's gotten looser with holding the ball. Then wrapping up with 20-plus yards rushing plays, I think he's going to have 3. In 2014-2015, he had 8, and you have to remember he barely played in 2015, but he's gotten 4 and then a 3 in 2016 and 2017, respectively. I don't see it improving, so I'm going to keep it at 3 just because 2 seemed too little. Like, it's really hard to imagine going a whole season only getting 2 20-yard rushing plays as a running back. But that really wraps it up for my statistics.
Alrighty. So, at the end of the season, Bell's walking. There's no way he's coming back, right?
No, I think this is the end of a LeVeon Bell era in Pittsburgh.
So what's going to happen for Bell? What's going to happen for the Steelers? What's going on after this split up?
I think the Steelers have to play it by ear, but I think what's happening is the Steelers stand their ground and don't up their offer again. It's not a thing they can do. They don't have the money. Like, that's it. Like, even next year, it's just, even if they could rework some contracts, I don't think it's worth it. It's just not. Again, it's now just another year where if he does have a decent year, it's just another year he's closer to falling off a cliff. So I even suggest lowering it to $13.5 million just to make sure he leaves. And if he gets hurt during the season, don't even make him an offer. It's just not worth it. There's no worth in that. I think Bell will end up leaving, that being said, and I think he's going to be a Colt starting the 2019 season. That is my guess now, that he's going to be a Colt. Book it, tag it, whatever. Just bring it back up to me when I'm right in the start of the 2019 season. And if I'm wrong, forget about it. I never said it. But what do you think is going to happen from now with the Steelers and with Bell? What do you think happens in the 2019 season?
Well, I just don't see him coming back to Pittsburgh. I've been trying to think of a scenario where maybe he sits out the 10 game. We didn't even talk about that. There was talk from Adam Schefter. He was saying that he might sit out eight games. I don't even think we talked about that.
No, we didn't.
Is he going to sit out any games?
No, I don't think so. That was just speculation from Adam Schefter saying he could do it. It wasn't like people started believing it after they saw it, but it was just speculation of what he could do.
He did talk before about missing a couple games, but I think that would kind of defeat the purpose of what he wants to do, which is maximize how much money he would be making, which was kind of the point of all of this. He'd be missing $850,000 a game by not showing up, and he could play 6 games and still get through the franchise tag. But what kind of terrible fortune would it be that he ends up getting hurt in Game 6 or something that year? Say he still plays only 6 games and still manages to get hurt. It defeats the purpose. So I think that plus the amount of money he'd be losing if he sits out all those games, you're looking at him dropping almost $9 million, which what's the point of doing all this just to lose that kind of money? He's not going to miss those game checks. So I fully expect him to be ready and in uniform for week 1. When do you think he's going to show up, by the way?
I think he's going to turn up earlier than last year, at least if he has any sense in him. He has to prove himself to other teams. So if he's smart or his agent is smart, his agent is telling him to show up for at least a little earlier so he looks like he can be cooperative with other teams and so he can be in prime form for the season. So my guess is he shows up for preseason game 1. I don't even think when he shows up for preseason game 1 the Steelers are going to use him. Typically, if the Steelers only use their starters in game 4, really, because game 1 now, with the changes from last year, you now have more people on your roster, you're still checking out. So you don't even really, you don't want to get your starter shirt anyway, but they got a lot more people to check out. So I think he's ready to, if he's there and available for preseason game 1, but I don't think he sees action until preseason game 4. But earlier than last year is my point. He shows up earlier than last year. Last year he didn't show up until the last preseason game, or was it the second to last preseason game? Now I'm confused.
He showed up right after the last preseason game.
Okay, right after the last preseason game. And when do you think he shows up?
I think he shows up either right around then or a week before, just to try to get in some more practice time with the team to act as though he's a little more serious about having a good year, because the slow start he had last year really damaged his final stats, and I think he really doesn't want to have a repeat of that with such a big contract year coming up. All right, so we already talked a little bit about what's going to happen with Bell. What are the Steelers going to do after Bell leaves? I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
I think they're going to put bets on James Conner. Reports right now are that James Conner is looking good, but that's backfired all the time. Trey Archer looked good in preseason stuff and in camp and stuff. We have to see it translate onto the field. Hopefully this preseason, in a few of the games, we get to see James Conner really show off what he's got. That's basically the only time we're going to see him until Bell leaves, so it's going to be mostly a mystery. Because I can't shake the thought that the Steelers are going to just keep it in house. Like, I don't feel like they're going to draft a running back. The way they've been operating with their position of needs, at least in the draft, has been completely out of whack. It's been very weird. And I personally think that they're going to at least try out James Conner, maybe draft a later round running back to keep a rotation going if James Conner isn't all that. But we'll really see. I think the Steelers have a lot of choices that they don't even know the answers to yet, because they might still try and. I think they're going to keep an offer up for Bell and say, hey, we'll still give you that $14 million a year. But I think that they roll with James Conner going forward for at least a little bit until they can see what he's capable of. What do you think?
I still think they spend a draft pick on a running back next year. I don't know how early they do. I don't think they're getting round one, but I still think they're going to do. I still think they're going to draft a running back, and as we've seen, running backs can be replaced pretty easily based on draft picks. And I guess, think about this. There are 4 guys last year who made big impacts, and I think 2 of them were round 1 and 2 of them were round 3. Correct me if I'm wrong. These players being Fournette, who was an early first-round pick. Who was the other one? McCaffrey. Was he a first-round pick or a second-round pick?
McCaffrey was a first-round pick.
And then 2 third-round picks in Kareem Hunt and Alvin Kamara. Yeah. So the guy who led the league in rushing in the Offensive Rookie of the Year were third-round picks, mind you. So I don't know. I feel like you can get a pretty good running back in the draft. I'm not saying you replace Bell with everything, pass blocking, catching, running all at once, but like we said, maybe they've started putting a back by committee thing together. Look at the Ravens. They got a dude off the practice squad, Alex Collins, who was a top 10 rusher last year. He can play. He's not great, but he can play. You can find effective running backs just about everywhere. It's just a matter of effectiveness in what roles. That's what you need to find out. All right. So that being the case, I think the only thing left to talk about is where does Bell's career go after this? I know you mentioned him going to the Colts, but really how much longer does he have to play? Because he's had a huge workload in the NFL, and he had a huge workload in college too. And I'll touch on that in a little bit, but just how much longer is he going to be in the league?
I think he's got 3 years max. 3 years good max, and then he's going to start declining, and that's maximum. I think he's actually going to start really declining after next season. I think it's really because he's going to lose that offensive line unless he goes somewhere with a good offensive line. And then with my prediction, I think the Colts, where they did just get Quentin Nelson, who is supposed to be a generational player, but the rest of that Colts offensive line is absolutely terrible. Jacoby Brissett got hit so much last year behind that. And just, I feel like he's going to go to, because Bell has to go to a place that has money. And a place that usually has money doesn't usually have an offensive line. I mean, not necessarily, but usually good offensive line teams have paid all of their offensive linemen, like basically the Steelers have. The Steelers have paid all their offensive linemen for the most part. And just, I just think I can't see him making it very long, especially now without offensive line. What do you think? How long does he last?
Well, the other thing to consider is this offensive line knows how to block for him. That's the other thing, is that Bell has a very unique style when it comes to running with the football. And you think about that, it was kind of tough early on in the year for him to run. I think some of that had to do with the offensive line too, because there is an adjustment process. No one else in the league runs like he does. No one else before him. And, of course, some players like Christian McCaffrey are trying to run a little bit like him now. But, you don't often see players stop at the line of scrimmage and wait. It's a patience game. And I don't know anyone else that plays like that. So it's definitely an adjustment process. And you're talking about a very talented offensive line, and one that has probably the best offensive line coach in all of football in Mike Munchak. And it takes time. So what does that mean when you have a less talented or a group that's not as well coached? Because that's probably what's going to happen. Or what about when there isn't a good quarterback or receiver to help, not necessarily protect, but to help shoulder the load? Whereas if he goes to Indy, I know there's T.Y. Hilton there for instance, but he's going to be the main guy there. And if it's Brissett or possibly Andrew Luck, even though he'd be coming back, it'd be like he hasn't thrown a ball in 2 years. Let's see how that goes. So he'd likely be facing 8-man boxes all the time. He'd be double-teamed. So, I mean, I just think it'd be tough. And one player that I have actually drawn comparisons to, I've spent a good amount of time doing this, those of you might remember is the name Eddie George, the former Houston and Tennessee Oilers / Titans running back in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. Eddie George was a fantastic running back for the Tennessee Titans. His first 5 years of his career, so ages 23 to 27, he was the definition of a workhorse. In 80 games, he had 1,700 attempts, 42 touchdowns, 85, 86 yards a game. He carried the ball 22 times a game, caught the ball two more times a game. He was a workhorse. And in 2000, he led the league with 403 carries. And then from that point on, he really fell off. And he still had productive seasons, but his efficiency really got worse. So he averaged just under 4 yards a carry in his first 5 years. In his last, in his last four, his career spanned from 96 to 2004, his last year with the Dallas Cowboys. His last 4 years, he only averaged 3.2 yards a carry on 1,102 rushing attempts. He never had a season where he averaged more than 3.4 yards a carry, and his yards per catch went down. He only had 2 receiving touchdowns in those 4 years. He really slowed down, and even though he was putting up big numbers some of those years, 2 more 1,000-yard seasons, he just wasn't efficient with the football. And you look at his first 5 seasons compared to Bell's first 5 seasons, they're very similar. As a matter of fact, George had a total of 1,927 total touches in those first 5 years. In Bell's first 5 seasons, which, by the way, Bell has also missed a handful of games, a good amount of games. He only played in 6 games in 2015. He had an injury that cost him some games his rookie year. And then he had the suspensions in 2015 and 16 as well, which cost him some games. He has a total of 1,541, so 1,541 touches. That's only 386 touches less than George did. So he's averaging more touches a game at this point through his career than Eddie George was in his career. And the other thing with Bell you have to consider is that going back to his college days, he was a workhorse in college too. He wasn't a full-time starter in his first 2 years, freshman and sophomore years at Michigan State, he still had almost 300 total rushing attempts those first 2 years. And in his final year, he jumped to almost 400 rushing attempts that season with 382. He touched the ball on average 250 times a year, over those 3 years, and he wasn't even playing a lot in those first 2 years. He has touched the ball a lot, and he has the ball in his hands a lot, so he's getting hit a lot, and he's not getting hit hard a lot, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that in the next couple years, he's probably going to start slowing down, and when he starts slowing down, it's probably going to happen pretty quick, as we've seen with most running backs. Your decline usually lasts, at most 3 to 4 years? That might be generous.
Something like that. Like, usually three or four. Like, the running backs just don't last. That's the thing. Running backs just, as soon as they start declining, teams don't really wait because they're easily replaceable. That's the thing with running backs. Like we went over earlier, Alvin Kamara or guys like that come out of the third round, and you could replace someone by committee. It's just easy to replace a running back.
And we were talking about other good running backs of this past generation, guys like Marshall Faulk and Steven Jackson. Steven Jackson went from a guy that was rushing for 1,000 yards to his last 3 years, his third to last year and second to last year, he was productive but was under 1,000 yards. And then his last year, he only played in 2 games. Another guy I can think of was Ben Jarvis Green-Ellis. Remember him? I got to look up his stats.
Yeah. Jeez,
I remember
former
Bengal and Patriot. So this is a dude that was kind of a role player. His first 2 years, had a couple of good years in New England to end his career there in 2010 and 11. 2 years in Cincinnati, the first one 1,000 yards, and then the second one he dropped down to 756 yards. His yards per carry dropped by a half yard that second year, and then he was gone. Another one was Cedric Benson. I remember him, another Bengals running back. He also fell off, if I'm not mistaken. So he started off slow, but he kind of caught fire with the Bengals in 2009. 3 straight seasons of 1,000 yards, and then, boom, 2012, he went from 1,067 yards to 248. He dropped from 4.0 yards per carry to 3.5. And how about another one that Steelers fans probably remember? In fact, LeVeon Bell's probably going to pass him week 1 in terms of Steelers rushing yards is Willie Parker. He had 3 seasons in a row with 1,200 or more rushing yards. Then he had an injury-plagued 2008 season where he rushed for under 800 yards, and his yards per carry dropped. His yards per carry dropped every year from his first season as a starter. He went 4.7 in 2005, 4.4 in 2006, 4.1 in 2007, then 3.8 in 2008. And then in 2009, he got replaced by Rashard Mendenhall, didn't even top 400 yards, 0 touchdowns in his last season. So really, it doesn't take long is what I guess I've been trying to get at. And I think the Steelers, like what I've been saying, the Steelers have played this perfectly. If you're not careful, that long-term deal, if Bell accepted it, all of a sudden, if it's averaged out a little more evenly, which I don't think it would have been, but if it was a pretty even deal per year, you could be looking at paying a dude who, say last year was the first year of his decline because he wasn't that efficient with the ball. Say, like, his best years are already behind him. In the next few years, he's still getting 1,000 yards, but his days of averaging, almost 5 yards a carry are done. What's that going to mean to a team that might need a running game on a day when the defense can't stop somebody or the offensive line has suffered injuries and Ben is getting pressured all the time? So I don't know. It's hypotheticals, but I just don't see him lasting a whole lot longer. What say you to all that research and thought we've put into this?
Really, I think a good player to look at when thinking of Le'Veon Bell and comparison-wise is Edgerrin James. And Edgerrin James only really lasted about 7 years doing good. As soon as he left Indy and went to Arizona is when basically his career was done. It started to go downhill. Of course, he did have that 3.6 yards per carry season in Indianapolis in 2002, but like that was he still bounced back and had a 4.6 yards per carry game a year. I'm sorry, just 2 years later in 2004. So, and Edgerrin James is a player that is exactly like LeVeon Bell. He was a workhorse. He made a lot of catches in the year, usually getting around 60, a little less than Bell, but still. And he only lasted 7 years. 7 seasons, 6 years. It's really just how much longer is a running back going to last? It's not worth giving Le'Veon Bell a 5-year extension when he's probably going to fall off with the amount of work he puts in, the amount of work that the Steelers hand him. It's not worth it. I think the field was played perfectly by the Steelers, like you said, and just that's really it. It's just this is sad how it's going to be. I wish Le'Veon Bell would have just taken it, and I mean, we all pretty much would have been happy except for when he really fell off. But just it is what it is, I suppose.
I blame Todd Haley for Edgerrin James' lack of success in Arizona. He was the offensive coordinator there.
Yeah.
Our favorite whipping boy. But in all seriousness, I think we've covered this point pretty well, and I think those of you listening will kind of understand where we're coming from. And that's the thing. I don't think any of us sit here and can actually say that we think the Steelers are a better football team without him. Can we actually think that?
I don't.
He's a great player for sure, but the running back market and his age and just the history is not on his side. And I think that for all that, plus his possibly ridiculous demands, were just too much. And I guess I'll leave you with this one question. Is Bell going to be another one of those Steelers or former Steelers that you're going to say, like, wow, I bet they regret not taking that deal? Kind of like maybe like a Mike Wallace or I don't know. Another name is escaping me, but Mike Wallace is probably the most recent one that comes to mind.
I completely think so. I completely think as when he gets to his next team, I think he's gonna not be as good. I think he's gonna fail, and the team is gonna want to get rid of him almost immediately. And I think he's gonna regret not sticking with the Steelers. A lot of I was reading an article the other day actually, just saying that a lot of former Steelers that switched teams said that they regretted leaving the Steelers, and I think that's going to happen with Bell. When he says he genuinely wanted to stay in Pittsburgh and retire as Steeler, I think he's being genuine. So I think it's not going to work out in his favor when he switches. I think he's going to regret it.
What I had a question on my mind, but I completely forgot about it. I forgot, but it's been an interesting couple of years. But I guess prepare for this to be Bell's last year, I guess is what I'll be telling everybody. So.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. You just got to be ready for the Steelers to move on and get ready for James Conner era, I guess, or whoever running back they draft if they draft one.
At the very least, with training camp just a couple weeks away, now we can finally start focusing on what's going to be happening for the 2018 Steelers. Now we can kind of move forward a little bit. I guess that's something that can be good about it. On the con side, you can say there's nothing to talk about, but then again, there hasn't been much to talk about at all this offseason besides this, which we had already rehashed, 10 times over the past year and a half?
Yeah, this has been a common occurrence. This has been a common talk.
So I think I've had my share of this talk, and it'll be interesting to kind of look back at this maybe in a few years and say, what exactly did happen. But Bell's story is not done in Pittsburgh, so we'll see what 2018 brings. But for now, thank you as always for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Austin, is there anything else you wanted to say tonight before we finish up?
No, I think we're good.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to check us out on our various social media platforms. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and SoundCloud. We also post our episodes on YouTube and SoundCloud and iTunes as well. You can look up our information on our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. Also, on our on our Instagram page, I've been posting pictures from the Steelers' regular season and soon-to-be playoff game from last season, just kind of going through the best pictures and moments from last season, even though it didn't end the way we all wanted it to. I just figured it'd be something to pass the time with. We're in the middle of Week 14, the Steelers and Ravens, where the Steelers won the AFC North, a game that Austin and I both attended, actually, and I'll be finishing up with that relatively soon, and then on our YouTube page. I don't know how I ended up discovering this, but I thought it would be a good idea to go through and kind of create highlight videos for every game that the Steelers played in 2005 and 2008, kind of going over the best and brightest moments from those championship-winning teams this offseason. So right now I'm in the middle of trying to post a video per day of every game the Steelers played in 2005 and just Steelers highlights. We don't really care about what the other team did right now. So get ahead, go on down to our YouTube page, Stronger Than Steel Podcast, and check it out. Tomorrow we'll be posting the Week 6 game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, so be sure to check that out. It's a lot of fun. So, as always, Austin, thank you for joining me. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Have a great night.
Good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.